just put in perspective of like, hey, you know what? Not to scare people, just to be like, hey, you're not guaranteed to get to 80. You're not guaranteed to get to 25, you know? And so really just put it in perspective of like, hey, nothing is guaranteed, but that you've been born and that you will die. That's it.
That was the only two things.
That's the only two things.
Even being born, like everybody don't get that luxury. So we're living in an age where you can die from an insect bite. Like whenever literally. I have to get myself back in check, if I feel like I'm doing a little too much, I'll be like, bro, you die from an insect bite. It's like that.
I'll be like, yourself.
Get yourself together. Oh no. I don't get it. It's okay. We get
it. I was like, yes, Lord. Come on with the cancellations.
Ooh, we going in it. Now just kidding.
I don't know if you know this, but I'm black. Am I good?
He's with the best of them. And he's one of my favorite men at the Alpha side.
that entrance sounds like much more than who I actually am.
When you're younger, you think you have so much time. You think that you just like, I'm young, it's YOLO, whatever, you know, like I'm gonna do whatever. But you really don't know. Like your assignment may be from birth to 17, or it might be from birth to 12.
That is really real. And I think the sooner, especially young people, the sooner you can realize that, the better. Sometimes, unfortunately, realizing it takes some unfortunate, events. I mean, I remember being 6 and my little cousin passed away. He was 2, and that was like my first like, oh wow, kids die, because I was just thought at 6, I just thought like, oh, you grow up, you get older, and then you you might get sick, and you pass away, and I was like, oh, kids can die.
Yeah.
And then in middle school, I mean, I lived in a small town, but it was like tragedy. What like on the way to school one day, this kid, his sister was driving, they had a wreck, he was ejected from the car, passed away. Then I had a friend, we ate lunch together every single day in high school, ate lunch together. We went to track meet together, because in the varsity would go, we'd be at the same place, had a basketball tournament in December. We were out for break, had a basketball tournament, collapsed on the court, went into cardiac arrest, passed away. No warning, no deathbed. That's why I say if you get a chance to be on your deathbed, because sometimes you don't even get that chance. No warning, no nothing. And so I think for me, it always made me realize when my cousin passed away, he had gotten sick all of a sudden out of nowhere, and the doctors didn't do what they should do. And they were like, oh, it's fine, it's nothing. And then he passed away. And then, the car wreck happened, and I was like, ooh, sudden. And then when my friend Larry passed away, I was like, ooh, sudden. And it really just made me realize, like, it's no guarantee that you get hey, you know what, things are looking bleak, we should all come together. It's no guarantee that you get that option, that opportunity. And, when I was living in Fort Worth, I moved out here in 2015. In 2014, my Meemaw passed away unexpectedly. Sid was watching TV and was like, oh, my chest. She said, I think my pacemaker is acting up. Call 911. Collapsed, passed away. Wow. No warning, no chance to say goodbye, no nothing. And so I think that to me has always made me be like, it just reiterated what I already knew. Like, I could be here in the morning and I ain't no chance I get to go to bed in the evening.
Absolutely.
Like, so to me, every moment I get, I'm trying to do as much as I can to be like, okay, well, let me have a good time. Let me do as much as I can while I can, right? Like, I had a medical scare. I call my friends have a hashtag at medical mayhem. And I went from like, oh, I feel fine. I had a surgery that I thought was a minor surgery. And the doctor ruptured part of my intestine, didn't know. Wow. And so I was saying like, hey, I'm having a little discomfort. Like I'm hurting. Oh yeah, that's normal. I'm like, okay. So I was like, okay, flew back here. I'm like, hey, I'm having pain. Oh yeah, it's fine. And one day I was at work and all of a sudden I had these sharp pains. I don't want to say sharp pains. I mean, like, I've never been in labor, but I would almost feel like, just out of nowhere, to the point that I guess I was like making a face, and my supervisor was like, are you okay? And I was like, no, I'm hurting. I was like, I'm in pain. I was like, I never use that word. I was like, I'm in pain. So he was like, I think you should go home. And I was like, I can't even get up right now to go home. I was like, give me a minute. So I stayed at work, worked a couple more hours, and then finally I was like, okay, I'm gonna go home. Went home. And that was on a Friday. Felt a little better on Saturday, did whatever, felt dizzy on Sunday. Monday I went to an urgent care. They're like, oh, it's not, treating me like a statistic. He said, I hope it's not. I said, I had a surgery a month ago. And he was like, oh, I hope it's not what I think it is, but I'm gonna check. So I was like, oh, dog, what you think it is? Like, he said that like he thought I had stage 93 cancer. Like that's how, he was like, I hope it's not what I think it is.
Yeah.
So when he came back in the room, I was like, what do you think it is? He was like, I'm going to check you for pregnancy. Well, first of all, at that point I was a 30-year-old woman. Maybe I was 31. So I could be wanting to have a kid. So for you to be like, I hope it's not what I think it is, already let me know how you view me right now. Yeah, anyways, like already. So. And I said, well, one, I just had a surgery and I had a myomectomy. So I was like, so I can tell you right now that it's not pregnancy. Like, yeah, I can assure you it's not pregnancy. He's like, no, I'm going to check you for that. So I'm like, okay, well, why are we wasting our time here? Because at this point, I'm so dizzy. The nurse had to be like, hold on, we can't take you. Like, I'm dizzy. I'm like, something is off. So he's like, I'm going to give you antibiotic. Then you got a urinary tract infection. I'm like, what? How you get that? He's like, yeah, so I think you should go to the emergency room and get a pregnancy test at the hospital. So I was like, why would I do that? He was like, well, this one came back negative, but they can do a blood test. And I was like, so why wouldn't I just go to the doctor and then sit in the emergency room in November during flu season? And I was like, no. So I came home Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night into Friday was so bad that I remember I was like, I can't make another night like this. So Friday, so my neighbors, thankfully I had good neighbors. I met good neighbors. And my neighbor had my dog, and I was like, you know what? I was like, I decided I'm gonna take myself to. I've never been to the emergency room before. I was like, but I need to go to the emergency room. Mm-hmm. And so she didn't even ask me, when are you going? She said, what time you want me to be there? I'll come pick you up. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, let me take a shower and try to brush my hair, which is so sad because I was like, as a Black woman, I know if I come in here looking like what I look like now, I've just been laying here for days. I was like, let me try to take a shower and get up and try to brush my hair back at least, like. Look as decent as I can before I go in here. So she's like, okay. So I take a shower and I get up. And then once I get up and we start going to the car, I mean, I can't really stand up straight, but I don't feel too bad. She's like, how are you? And I'm like, actually, this is the most okay I've been. So she's like, okay, Katrina, I got there and it's packed in there. So I'm like, dang. So the lady's like, okay, we're going to get you in. They're real efficient. I went to this hospital. I was good. So they're like, okay, we're going to take your temperature. They're like, are we going to bring you back in triage? I'm like, oh, that's quick. Like, I didn't sit there 5 minutes. I'm like, okay. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, oh, you want me to go back out? She was like, no, I'm going to take you in a room. I'm like, oh, this is, okay, Lord, you looking out. You looking out. We get in the room and she says, you know what? We want to double check your temperature because the temperature said your temperature is 101. And for an adult, it's a little high. We want to make sure. Temperature was now 102, over 102. Wow. So they're like, okay, something's happening. So they're like, first we're going to hook you up to IV, blah, blah, blah. So they're trying to stick me. I'm like, okay. At this point, because I had been feeling so bad, I haven't really eaten. I haven't really drinking. So they're like, oh, we can't get anything. They stuck me 13 times, 13 different places we trying. So I'm like, I'm not trying to be rude. I was like, but y'all sticking me like, can you get somebody who's really good at this? And I was like, not saying nobody else is not really good at this, but I'm like, since I'm probably dehydrated, like somebody in these situations. And I was like, I'm not trying to be difficult. Like, I start having bad chills. My heart rate drops. I go into septic shock. So I go into septic shock. And at that point, your top number on your blood pressure, I think, is your systolic number. Mm-hmm. Mine won't go over 70.
Wow. So
the machine is beeping. So at this point, I text my parents. I had been telling them I wasn't feeling well. And so I text my parents and I'm like, hey, my neighbor's texting them. So then they're like, oh, you know what? We think we see an abscess. I'm like, an abscess? They're like, yeah. I'm like, where? And like, in the abdomen. I'm like, oh, in my body. Because I take a CT scan, I do an ultrasound, something like that. So they're like, oh, we're gonna admit you. But she said it real cool. So I was like, I ain't never been to the hospital before. I was like, that means you're about to keep me here.
Yeah, pretty
much.
Like,
so I was like, that's right. And she was like, yes. So I'm like, okay. So I'm texting my parents. So I remember my dad said, do you think we should come? He said, do you want us to come? And at that point, I knew something was going on. I mean, I started having chills so bad. I was like, am I having a seizure? I was like, something is happening. So I said, if you can get here, you may need to come. And he was like, you said that so calm. He was like, I knew then that you meant like something was wrong. So they're like, oh, so finally, like, we're going to roll you into a room. This one, I've been here almost 12 hours. Like, we're going to get you a room. We're trying to find a room for you. we're going to take you to ICU. So the way they said it, they made it seem like, oh, we ain't got no room nowhere else, so we just going to stick you in ICU. So I was like, okay, you know. And then I was like, oh, I'm in here because then the machines start going on.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, I'm in here because I really need to be in here. I need,
yeah.
You know, they were trying to keep me calm. So they were like, you know, we want to make sure, typically when somebody is in severe sepsis like this, they're not alert.
Yeah.
And usually they're not conscious. And if they're conscious, they're not all together here. But you seem to be all together here. Do you comprehend everything that's happening? I'm like, oh, I comprehend everything that's happening. So like, okay. So, I mean, I had to get a subclavian mid-central line put in. They go and put this thing in your chest down over your heart. So if you die, they can revive you. They put a midline. I mean, I'm wide awake. And I remember when the lady said, the lady came in, so they have to clear the room. They have to make it a sterile environment. They put this thing over your face so you don't breathe. And when she got ready to stitch me up, I could feel every time the needle would go in, and I could feel her pulling through. And I was like, wow. But they kept saying, you can scream. And I'm just not a screamer. You know, I was like, oh, it's okay. When I'm quiet, that's when you know, oh, she didn't pay me. So I was like, oh, I don't need to scream. My ICU nurse was like, you can hold my hand. So I was like, I'll hold your hand. So when they pulled the sheet back, it was blood everywhere. And I said, oh my gosh. And the white nurse said, oh, girl, which first of all, I hate for a white woman to call me girl. So she said, oh, girl, please. I didn't even give you numbing medicine. You took that like a champ.
But why would you not give?
Why would you not? And so, you know, and so that's why I feel like people, you know, when I say listen to your spirit, you also got to know, I think, especially Black women, anybody listening, doctors, we've been taught like we don't question authority, and doctors are professionals. They know these things. Doctors know studies and they know what they've seen, but you know your body. Yeah. Can't nobody tell you about your body like you can tell you about your body.
Absolutely.
And so the whole reason I even went to surgery was because I was saying, you know, something is off. Like my periods are just heavy. And they were like, oh, are you having pain? And I was like, no. Are you having extended periods? I was like, no. And they're like, oh yeah, it's just, you're almost 30 and your hormones are changing and blah, blah, blah. We're just going to put you on birth control. And I was like, you know, that just, okay. So I tried that. Then I was like, I'm just not quite settled that that's what this is.
That's
like,
it.
oh yeah. And so it got to the point where I had to start regulating, where I was like, this is what I want. I had to research where I was like, I want an ultrasound and I wanted this. And they were like, oh no. So I had to pay, it cost me thousands, and I mean tens of thousands of dollars out of my pocket to do it because my doctor didn't recommend me. So it was like I was just going on my own will. I didn't have a specialist recommendation, or, you know, they didn't refer me. And so turns out I had a whole fibroid.
Wow.
That was, and just one, which was weird. Usually I have multiple, had one, and it was totally inside the womb. And at that point, it had gotten up to over 7 centimeters, which is bigger than your uterus even is. And so I was like so frustrated because I had the surgery in September, the end of September. And then here I was in November having emergency surgery. Like that was bad enough. For a year, I've been trying to get somebody to listen to me and be like, hey, I'm not crazy.
That's
something's
crazy.
Going on. And then I had this surgery, now almost die. And I remember it got to the point where I was in the room and they were like, we're going to have to do emergency surgery. It's going to take 2 teams. So they introduced the 2 teams. And the guy was like, I'm going to check your stomach. And he thumped it to see if there was retention. But because it was so hurting, he didn't warn me. And so I was like, ow, that was the first time. And he was like, and I saw he had like this look of disgust on his face. And he was like, okay, I'll just be back. And so I remember there was a Black doctor, and she came and she's like, oh, I'm working. And I said, are you going to be in the room when I go into surgery? And she was like, oh, you know, it'll be 2 teams. And I was like, but are you going to be in that room? And she was like, yes. And I said, okay, that's all I need to know. And I think then she got she was like, okay. And I was like, that's because they were like, you know, if we get in here and it's bad, we'll have to take your ovaries. And I was like, but you don't take my ovaries unless you know without a shadow of a doubt is to save my life that you got to take them.
Exactly.
Don't make that decision for me. Don't you do it. And so I was like, because he's like, you have to sign the paper saying that we can do it. And I was like, you can only do it if there's no other option. Don't you let me wake up and you were like, well, we could have done this what we thought was best. Like, you got to tell me that that's the only option. And so I, you know, when the Black doctor, I was like, are you going to be in there? And she was like, yes. And I was like, okay. And so I had to sign the papers, like, if you die, like, because at that point, nobody legally who could make decisions for me or my body was there. My parents were trying to get there. So, you know, I signed the paperwork. And I'll tell, like, that was one thing that I think made me feel, like, proud of myself because I didn't have any regrets.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this will be unfortunate if this way I go. Like, I'll be by myself. Like, my parents are trying to get to me. How sad if they get off the plane, rush here, and then feel like it's too late. Like, I was like, I want them to feel that way. But I remember when I was getting ready to roll in and I had my cell phone and I was battling between, do I text my friends and family just to be like, hey, I love you. Like, I don't know if things are really touch and go. Or is that more damaging because somebody might not see the text until later and then be like, oh, I wish I would have texted her. You know, like the what ifs, like, you know, is this?
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? And I opted out of it because I was like, my parents, if they get off the plane and they see this might really spiral them. And I was like, I won't do it. But I had peace with like, if this is it and I don't get another day besides today, I feel like I've done all I can. I've had good times. I feel like I've done right by people.
Yeah.
And it's not what I want, but I can be at peace with it, right? Like, and so I think that's just how people have to live their life. Like, hey, if it all ends tonight, not tomorrow, not next week, like if it all ends tonight and I get a chance to be like, okay, can I reconcile all the things? Like, am I good with it? And so that's just how I try to live my life. Like, hey, you know what? I'm good with how I've treated people. I'm good with the opportunities I've had. I'm good with the things that I've worked hard for, the things that worked and the things that didn't work. There's been some things that didn't work, you know, like I'm at peace with it. And so that's why I think people have to really, to me, that's the best way for me to live my life. Like, because it's just, you don't know. People are shooting people. People, you could collapse. You could get hit in the head. I mean, is a lady was in her car and somebody shot and accidentally shot and killed her. And I mean, just all kind of things that like, hey, you got to make sure, you know, like if we get in arguments, I mean, if I argue with somebody, maybe I'm not really a big arguer, but you know, people piss you off, you know, people get on your nerves, but I try to like, my thing is, okay, I might be annoyed, I might be pissed off, but once we talk about it and it's done, I'm done with it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, okay, we talked about it. Are you good? I'm good. Okay, we good.
Move on.
Because to me, I don't want to harp on it. Because if something happened to you, I got to live with it. And if something happened to me, I don't want you being like, oh, I wish. And no, don't even let the enemy fool you like that. We good. You said we good. I'm good. It's squash. Like, and if something happens, I can go peacefully and say, hey, you know what? I did all I could. I did right by people. I'm going to be all right. Like, it is what it is. And so I just think that's what people have to really realize. Like you said, it's no guarantee. I went from feeling fine to literally like, okay, this is it. Like, this could be, it was no get a chance to say goodbye to my friends. It was no nothing. I was at the hospital with my neighbor who then had been separated from me. So it was just me and a whole bunch of people I did not know. And I was like, if this is how it ends, this is it. I don't have my phone to be like, hey, I love you. Like, I can't FaceTime all the people. Like, this is it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what you got to really do. Like, hey, live my life. So if it's a wrap today, if I walk, you know, I think we take for granted, like we leave, we expect to come back home. So I'm like, if I leave this house today and I don't come back, I can be like, hey, I've done what I can in the time that I've had.
Absolutely.
Right.
Whenever I leave the house, I always ask God, I say, get us to our destination and back safely without interruption. And I'm so like, I'm focused on the fact that I know that I could not make it.
Yes.
I am a Black woman.
And because it'll humble you, you be like, you know what? Because people are like, oh, that's really morbid thought. I'm like, but it's very humbling because then it changed your perspective of how I interact with you, how I move with you. Because I'd be like, hey, I see you, like I love you, cool, see you later. Because I know if that because I think also like, and that's a big thing for me is making memories. When I say I'm a celebration queen, because I always celebrate anything. Yeah. I would not make a good Jehovah's Witness at all because I'm like, listen, we're going to celebrate this, we're going to celebrate that.
Everything.
Because I think people have to realize there will be a day when memories is all you're going to have.
Yeah.
Pictures and memories. That's it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when my Mima passed away, she passed away suddenly. And I mean, when you talk about like almost felt physically hurt, like, I mean, broke, you know, hurt. And I think one of the things I struggled with was when the way it happened was like Bella and my grandparents live on some property near my parents. So when you pull into my parents' driveway, you can look over and see there. So I had taken a late lunch. I was doing a fast and I just couldn't eat until 2:00. So I called my mom and she was talking. And then we were talking and she was like, oh my goodness. And I was like, what's wrong? And she was like, it's an ambulance next door. And I was like, an ambulance? And I was like, well, go over there and see what's wrong and let me know. And she was like, okay. So at that point, I was going back to work. I had taken a late lunch because I couldn't eat till 2:00 or 3:00. So I was like taking a late lunch. And I got back to lunch and I went in my office and I remember I sat there for like 10 minutes and I didn't do anything. And so somebody came in my office, asked me for something. They're like, are you okay? And I was like, no. It's like, I was like, Mommy, there's a ambulance over there. So I'm waiting to see. And they're like, oh, I'm sure she's fine. You know, I was like, maybe. And so I remember I was waiting and I waited about 10, 15 minutes. I don't even know if I made 15. And I was like, I went in the office to my supervisor and I was like, I gotta go. And she was like, oh no, something happened. And I was like, nobody called me back yet. But I was like, I gotta go. And I remember she was like, oh, okay, go ahead. It's no worries. And when I left and she said, okay, well, just let me know. You know, I know East Texas is a little far. Let me know about tomorrow if you want to stay home and you can't come. And I was like, I don't know when I'll be back. And I just remember when I said that, she was like, and I was like, I just don't know. Like, because I knew I was like, something is off. If something is off, I might be gone for 2-3 days. Like I may blow all my vacation. I don't know. And so I left and I remember when I was praying and I was like, Lord, I'm not even going to pray for you to be like, spare her life for forever. I was like, all I do ask is if you spare her long enough for me to get home and just
to see
talk, let her know I was there. Even if she's not conscious, I know she can still hear me. Just let me get there and have that moment with her while she's still on this side to say like, hey, I love, you know. And I didn't even I was on the ramp to get on 20 and my mom was like, she didn't make it. And I remember, you know, for a long time, me and God, I had a rough spot spiritually because I remember being like, you know, God, I didn't even ask. Like most people be like, oh, save them. And I was like, and I was like, okay, if it's the time, can you just let me have a good, you know, I was even asking for extra conversations. I wasn't asking. So I was like, I was really upset. I was like, you know, you didn't even let me get a chance to say goodbye. I didn't get to do all these things. And, you know, she was like my mom and, you know, all these things. And then I remember the next day I got home, my dad was talking and I was like, you know, I just feel cheated. And I was like, I feel like God cheated me. Like that's all I wanted was just to have a moment. Like I wasn't asking for anything else. Like he got the power to do everything. That seems pretty simple. Like, let me have this moment. And my dad was like, you know, I felt the same way. He was like, but she was never ours. And I was like, ooh, humble. You know, and he was like, so it really don't matter. And he was like, she wasn't ours. And then I just started to think about like all the times that I've lost people and coming from a big family, people lose people and you lose friends. And I was like, that's true. Like all we get to do is experience people, but they are not ours.
They are not.
You know, but that's how I felt. Like, oh, that's my, you know, that's everything, right? And then he was like, but she was never out. He was like, she was never ours to keep. Like, we just got that time. And then I had to be like transition. I mean, I still, and don't get me wrong, it didn't transition that quick. It made sense mentally. Emotionally, I still had to struggle with God. You know, I was like, God, come on, like,
right?
You can do me no better than that, like, you know, like. And so, you know, but I think also in my talking about unlearning things and learning new things, I really learned, in my opinion, because I'm no theologian, I don't see a problem with us questioning God. But when I grew up, you know, it was like we don't question God. But I'm like, if I don't question God in my relationship with God, how can I learn from God?
Exactly.
You know, so like I did. I questioned God. And then at that point, I was still kind of on the brink of that. But I remember feeling kind of guilty, like I shouldn't be questioning God. And then I was like, but you know what? How can I have a relationship with anybody that is a true bond and relationship if I never question anything?
Yeah.
And I just do whatever. I'm like, I cannot have. And so I think that's something I think people, especially young people, live like, it's okay to question God. You know, like the old saints, they'll say, don't question God. You know, his ways are perfect. And all those, and not only that, you know,
it's a conversation.
It's a conversation. Not only that, that it's okay to say, you know, people are like, oh, you shouldn't be mad at God. I'm like, that's a human reaction. And God knows you're human. So there's times where I'd be like, God, I'm mad. Like I feel like you played me. You know, like, you know, and I come back humble later, but it's times where I just have to say it. Like, I feel played. Like, I feel like I try to do all the things, you know, then you go through the list. I try to do all the things, you know, and so it just doesn't matter.
But we're not punished by our good deeds, though.
And we're not punished by our bad ones all the time. Because if that's the case, we don't deserve half the stuff. You know, people are like, oh, when I get, but that's not true.
I wouldn't
because
be
I'm
here.
like, it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff. So I'm like, so it works both ways. And so I really had to be like, okay, come around and be like, all right, Lord, like, okay, it was your will. And then I had to look at other things and say, well, you know what? I'm glad she didn't suffer.
Yeah.
She didn't suffer. She would have rather had that way. And then I had to also think about, if I know her truly, would she have even wanted me to come be at her bedside like that?
Yeah.
And so my thing was, if it came down to my wishes over her wishes, and that was gonna make her more peaceful, give her wishes. So, I had to really think like, okay, would giving me what I wanted have gone against what she would have wanted for her grandkids? Be like, I don't want them to see me like that or whatever. So, but that again took time. So I don't want nobody to feel like, well, I'm in this place and I don't feel that. I didn't feel that for a while.
Yeah.
I was just like, God, this how you gonna do me? And then also I think sometimes bad things happen and people be like, oh, that's God's will. And I'm like, but there's good and evil.
Yeah.
And so sometimes things happen and God allows them to happen, but I don't know that I necessarily believe all of it is God's will.
No.
And so I think people quickly will be like, oh, well, this happened and so-and-so was killed, but it's God's will. And I'm like, I kind of don't quite agree with that, because I'm like, things happen, and that would be like you saying slavery is God's will. And that's like, so, like God may not intervene in the way we want him to intervene because he allows things to happen. But that don't mean that it's necessarily his will. He knew it was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
He may not intervene. So I think, when people be like, oh, and I think that's another thing people have to do is like, when you somebody's grieving or somebody's going through something, you want to comfort them, but, stick with the facts, because people are like, oh, this is how God wanted it. And I was like, I really just struggled because I was like, okay, I don't have the energy to go back and forth with you, but like, okay, thank you for because you don't want to seem rude, but I'm like, I don't agree with that. Like, I just think things happen.
Mm-hmm.
And in the midst of things happening, and whether it was, through medicine or malpractice, all kinds of things, whether things happen, he didn't intervene the way I wanted him, but he intervened. He was still sovereign in the way that he let it be quick. She didn't suffer.
That's his will.
She wasn't hooking up. That is his will.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that's what I think. That's why I say I think people got to really know what they believe and why they believe it. Because like I said, then I started being like, oh, things happen. I'm like, well, that's God's will. And then I was like, I don't think that, like, it's babies out here getting shot. It's babies dying from cancer. I don't really think that that's God's will.
No.
But I think he knows it's going to happen and he works in other ways. But I don't think that that's like, oh, God was like, oh, these suffer the little children. Like, I don't. So that's why I think, people really got to know what they believe and why they believe what they believe. Mm-hmm. So that way, in moments like that, you're not putting salt in the wound when you're trying to really help somebody. But being like, oh, this is God's will. So, it's God's will. You should be glad about it. I'm like, no, I don't have to be.
Yeah.
I'm hurt. My feelings hurt. I'm crushed. Like,
and that's okay it's okay for your feelings to be hurt too. Like the way your dad, he said she didn't belong to us. That's literally how I view death. Like, I feel like God lends us people, and it's so amazing to be able to experience that person. I mean, it's a blessing, actually.
Yes. A full blessing.
And that's how I look at it. And people think I'm crazy because of how I've experienced a lot of death in my life too. So I think people think I'm crazy how I can kind of bounce back from it. But that's all God. It's not me.
Right.
It's all God. And I understand the concept of I got to experience this person for all this time. God wants his child back. Period. Who am I to argue about that?
Who am I to argue? Yeah.
So
I mean, that's I think people when they like and even then when Nipsey Hussle passed away, when Lauren I read something and Lauren was like, I'm so glad I got to experience it. And I was like, that's real, like, because that's the truth. And when you think about it in that way, people are like, oh, that's morbid. No, it's not. It can be, but really you'd be like, hey, I know I'm trying to experience all the things I can experience with you. I'm trying to celebrate every good moment, trying to work through all the rough moments, and then celebrate coming out of those moments. Like, I'm trying to experience every good thing. Like, that's what I want to do. So I'm like, I think just put in perspective of like, hey, you know what? Not to scare people, just to be like, hey, you're not guaranteed to get to 80. You're not guaranteed to get to 25, and so really just put it in perspective of like, hey, nothing is guaranteed, but that you've been born and that you will die. That's it.
That was the only two things.
That's the only two things.
Even being born, like everybody don't get that luxury. So
Right.
We're living in the age where you can die from an insect bite. Like,
Mm-hmm.
whenever
Literally.
I have to get myself back in check, if I feel like I'm doing a little too much, I'll be like, bro, you die from an insect bite. It's like that.
Humble yourself.
Get yourself together. Like, seriously.
Humbled. Yes.
For real. That's real.
Yeah, I just like, so yeah, I think that is major key for me. Like, that has helped me because, like I said, it's an ongoing thing. It's not like, oh, I've got it down. Because, you know, last August, my uncle passed away unexpectedly. No warning, no nothing. I was crushed.
Yeah.
Mentally, though, I was in a different space than what I was when my grandma. I was at that point. I was like, right, I got to experience him. I did kind of have an issue. I was like, oh, he's got, you know, he left a wife behind, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old. Like, oh God, like, you know, like I felt for them.
Yeah.
But from my purpose, I was like, I'm hurting. But with him and with my Meemaw, the one thing, and I think also what people have to do is not to be selfish, but to give yourself insurance. As much as I was so hurt and so sad that my Meemaw passed away, I had so much peace because I didn't have a single regret.
Exactly.
She couldn't say I didn't call. She couldn't say I didn't check in on her. She couldn't be like, I wish, you know, she showed more. Like, every opportunity I had, I took it. We made memories, we did other things. And so to me, that's why I think people, I'm like, you got to make the memories now, because sometimes things happen and that'll be the only thing that give you peace. That's the only peace you got, is that, hey, you know what? I ain't got no regret.
Yep.
You know, people be like, oh, I wish I would have called my grandma more. I wish I would have done more with my dad. I ain't have that regret. I was like, listen, she knew.
Yeah.
I told her, I showed her, I made the memories with her. Like, I can say she ain't have to be ever questioned or get to the end and be like, oh, I wish I would have this. I wish. And so I was like, for that, I'm grateful. I ain't got to be tossing and turning at night. Like, if I could go back, you know, I don't have that.
I don't even need to ask you if you knew then what you know now. Would you do anything different? You just answered that. Literally.
Yeah.
No, for real.
Yeah, like, no, I mean, I was just like, okay, like, I felt at peace, but also it just was like a further reminder of like, hey, don't ever let up. Like, last June, I flew to Texas and I had a friend, been my friend since I was 8 years old, and she was engaged. And so she was like, oh, I'm gonna have, you know, we kind of want to elope, but we're gonna have a reception, but I want you to be the maid of honor. You know that. So I'm like, okay. So I ended up saying, you know what? I'm gonna host an engagement party for you. Now, engagement parties, traditionally, the parents host engagement parties, not the friends, you know. But she was like, well, because we're not having the wedding, that kind of cancels out some of the people, and then we have this big reception. So, you know, maybe we can have. First, she wanted to have a big something, and I was like, hold on, no. So I was like, what if what if we break it down? We have you an engagement party where you can invite people who won't be able to make it, maybe they'll get an invitation to everything, where they can still celebrate with you. And then you have a bridal shower for your mom and your aunt and your girls. And then you have a bachelorette party where you can do whatever you want to do and go from there. So she's like, okay. So decided to do that. I said, okay, we're going to have it in June. I find a venue. I book everything. I get decor. I do all the things. And I get home. And I decide, I fly to Texas on a Thursday. And the bridal shower the engagement party is going to be on a Saturday. So I get home and something was like, you know what, maybe you should just have like a little, but I said that before I get home, like the week before, I'm like, maybe I should just have like a little kickback with my family. And so I'm like, well, looking at my schedule, I'm like, I get in on Wednesday night, Wednesday's out, because by the time I get from Dallas, and Thursday I need to pick up the linens. I'm like, it had to be Friday. So I said, you know what, I'm going to have it on Friday. So I sent out the invite, we're going to have a cookout, we're going to have a get together. So my uncle, he's 44 years old, so we're closer in age where I feel like he was my uncle, but he's kind of like my friend. You know, we went through the progression. When I was young, he was in college, and then we kind of we're like, okay, we're kind of on the same page, close to the same page now. So the day before, I'm at his house. I'm always at his house. He's like, yeah, you want to just have it here? He was like, you know, now they had built a house. He's like, we got an outdoor kitchen, outdoor living, the playhouse be on, the kids could be out, we can sit outside, have it here. And I was like, well, you know, I don't want you to have to take on that, you know, my family's big, so I'm like, you host it, you have to clean, you know. I'm like, he was like, no, it's fine. So I was like, okay, I guess we'll do that. So we do. So then the linens fell through, all these things happened. So Friday, I ended up showing up late to the own party that I was trying to host, but he was like, I already got it together, got started. And so we do it. And I end up staying up all night because I'm still prepping stuff for this engagement party, and I got to blow up balloons, and I got to get these things ready, and I got party favors. And so I ended up staying like 42 hours straight. And I remember my mom was like, I don't know who you think you are. Like, my mom was like, my mom is a Southern mom. She's like, you are not wed yet. You need to be in pristine condition. Like, so, she was like, it's just too much on you. You shouldn't have done all this. And so I came back to Texas in August, and I didn't go home because I did like a breast cancer seminar, and I flew right back out. And I flew back out at 6:30 in the morning. And by the time I landed, my uncle got up in the morning to do something, collapsed, and had passed away just that quick in the flight from Dallas to DC. And so then I remember being like, I'm so glad. That's why you got to do what you want to do. It was on my heart to have a dinner in June.
Yeah.
We had a dinner, we laughed, we had a good time. That was the last time they all got together. And that was the last time I saw him. And so I just think that's why people got to really like make the memories you can while you can, because then that was all I had. That was the last memory I had. I didn't get to see him when I was there in August. And, I was like, well, now I don't have no regrets. Like the time my mom was like, this is too crazy. And then I remember her coming back and apologizing. And she was like, I'm glad you did it. Like,
yeah.
She was like, now I see. She was like, at the time, like you were saying, I want to host something. And I was kind of like, you don't have to. And she was like, you're right. Like now we have that memory. And that was the last time we all got to all be together.
Yeah.
And because you just don't know. You do not know. No warning, no nothing. Like when got up, just collapsed. Nothing.
Yeah. That's why I always tell, like, you do not have time. you don't have time. And you definitely want to live like to the best of your abilities, like godly, do everything that you feel like you can do.
Right, because you don't want to be out here wilding and be like, oh, when I get older, I'm gonna get right. Nah, that's not.
Nah, fam.
Don't get me wrong. I ain't gonna say like when I was younger, I didn't do that. I'm not saying that. You can still.
Yeah.
It's natural because the more you know, the more you grow. It changes. So you don't have to strive to be like for perfection because there's no such thing. We're not gonna be perfect. I'm never gonna be perfect.
We're not.
No, at all. And so like in college, did we do some stuff that was stupid?
Very.
Yeah. Yes. Out of college, did I do some stuff that was stupid?
We're not gonna share those things. We made it through.
We made it through.
Everybody's experience has the opportunity to like open up someone else's imagination and like really show them that there's different perspectives that you should consider.
Right.
And I think that the hardships that you've gone through has really shaped and molded the way that you see the world now. And it helps you be more philanthropic. Like it helped you with
right.
So,
and not only that, that's why I say for people, I think it's good to move away. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's some pros and cons, because when I had emergency surgery, I ended up, even once I got out of the hospital I was in there 8 days. Then I had to do daily IV infusions. I had a midline in my arm for another 30 days. So my mom had to stay with me because at that point, I couldn't drive. I still had like holes from where the drain was. It was a lot of things I couldn't do on my own. So don't get me wrong, it's got its pros and cons.
Yeah.
But it would have worked out if my mom could not have done it. My neighbor would have been like, hey, the Lord would have provided somebody for it to get done. So that's why I think, like, yes, there's pros and cons, but if you got the chance, do it, and so that's really my thing is like, hey, I've been through these things. It would be, in my opinion, selfish of me to be like, hey, it's too much. Like sometimes it's too much. You can't always tell your story right then.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are like, oh, it's good to tell it when you're going through it. And I'm like, sometimes you don't know what to tell yourself. And if I don't know what to tell myself, I sure can't know what to tell you. Like
absolutely.
If I can't do something for myself, I definitely can't do it for anybody else. Right. And so, because after I had the surgery, I had the emergency surgery, and then I had to have a third procedure. And all of that only for them to never get the first doctor never got the fibroid fully out. So I still have that. So I still have surgery, but it caused so much damage that the doctor told me, you know what? I don't think you'll ever be able to have children naturally. You'll probably have to have IVF. You have to do all these things. Then you need to have another surgery. He said, I honestly think so much damage has been done. You should just have a hysterectomy. And I remember that, like, I remember when he said, I just remember tears just like, instantly tears just, and I was like, okay. And he was like, I mean, he's like, I don't want to, because I was like serious, like, okay, we're handling business. But inside I was just like, wait, what? Because it was so preventable.
Yeah.
Because someone didn't listen. And this is what Black women have been saying. I was like, I've been fighting for this to even get a diagnosis. And then I get a diagnosis and I go from multiple doctor to multiple doctor because I'm, the first doctor he doesn't listen to me. And I got this doctor and I thought she was going to do right by me. And she didn't. And then I was like, Lord, like, I did and again, Lord, this what you gonna have me for? Like, I try to give, and I did. I went through the things like, I'm not even married. And now if I want to get married, at what point do you say, hey, I think we need to have a real talk? And, all these things like going through my mind, and then being a Southern woman, I'm 30 years old, because, Southern moms are like, oh, you 30 years old? Like,
like,
just all these.
That's what they be saying.
Oh, yeah. And so all these things, I was just like, God, like, you gonna do me like this? Like, that, I mean, that's like, you gonna let me get done like this? Like, I struggled. I just was like, golly, now I'm in a better position where I feel like, okay, now I can be like, hey, it's okay. Like, it's okay to feel those moments. My thing is, it's okay to be there. You just don't want to stay there. Like,
exactly.
and then I also struggled because I was doing it all by myself. So I was like, even once I finally got the midline out of my arm, I had been out of work for over 2 months. My insurance charged me $50 a day to get an IV because they said, oh, we could have taught you how to do it yourself and you didn't want to. And so for 30 days, I paid $50 every day. I went every day, Sunday, Saturday. And I remember being like, God, I'm not working. So like everything you save up and you have this, and that's how you're like, oh, I'm adulting, right? Which essentially that's what adulting is for. So when the things come, but I think I had started to put a little bit of my faith in money.
Yeah.
Not as in like, oh, money is this, but as a single woman who lives on her own and lives away, like, hey, as long as I got it's things I can't do, but the money will allow me to get it done. Like I can't fix my car, but I can pay somebody to fix the car, and I can't do this, but I can pay. So, I think I had started to get a false sense of like, okay, well, I got the money, I can get things done as somebody who's on their own. And so then when I was like, God, like, I just spent a whole year where I was paying, pay a lot of money for insurance and then turn around and still pay $170 every month for birth control pills because my insurance was like, oh no, we only want to carry this brand and this didn't help me. And so all these things, I was like, God, for 2 years, like, I feel like you've just been taken. Like, are you going to give me some, like, don't get me wrong, I knew I was waking up every day and I had a roof over my head, but that's just how I started to feel. It was like, okay, God, I feel like you tested me, but like, I don't see any reward, like, or no sign of like, hey,
of a break.
You still here, you're not going a break.
Yeah.
Like, and I did, because I remember, and then my uncle passed away and I was like, God, like, okay, you took away somebody I was confiding in about that. It was just like, I remember being like, I was like, okay, I kind of want to get a new job. I was like, in my position, I want to be challenged. And my friend was like, oh, you should look and get a new job. And I was like, I can't right now. And she was like, why? And I was like, because I think if I get one more rejection or what feel like a rejection, I just might lose it. And she was like, oh, and I was like, no, I'm just being honest about where I am. Like, it's real. Like, I just think right now, if I don't get a yes soon, I should just chill for right now. So, like that happened. I ended up meeting somebody. We started dating or whatever. And I'm like, okay, it's cool. And about second or third date, we sit there and we sit down, I order a glass of wine, and he was like, oh, so do you want children? So, because I had already had this thought of like, okay, when is the right time? Because I don't want to take advantage and be like, I'm gonna wait till the very last minute. And they'd be like, oh, I'm gonna tell you because you're gonna be committed. I'm like, I want to give people the chance to make their own decisions, right?
Yeah.
And so, it had been on my mind since we had talked about a first date. Like, oh, okay, like at what point do I decide? And I'm like, I'll see when it feels right, girl. And he was like, so do you want to have children? And I literally felt like Florida Evans. I was like, damn. Like, here we are. And I was like, because for me, in that moment, I wasn't going to be like, yes, and go on. I was like, I'm going to have to address it now because I want to be honest.
Yeah.
And so I was like, bruh. So I said yes. And then I remember I took a big old sip of wine. And I was like, okay. So I was like, I'm going to give you the quickest, most concise version I can give you, but still very informed. So I give him the full rundown. And I'm like, and as of right now, the last thing I've heard from a doctor is he suggested I get a hysterectomy and result to having a child via IVF and go through egg freezing. I don't know if that's the case. I haven't gotten their opinion right now. I'm just not in a position to really sit down and talk to somebody else about it.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know in my heart that I feel that's the only way, or that I believe that that's my only option. So I haven't acted on it. And so he was like quiet. So he's listening. He's like, okay. So he was like, I just want you to know that I've listened and that it doesn't, because I said, that's a lot to deal with. Mm-hmm. When you don't know, when you know. And I said, so if you think that may move more than you want to do it, I'm not upset. Because I think that's a fair thing. And, you can think about it. You ain't got to tell me now. I'm not asking you, but, you may feel that way. And I just still want to let you know and give you the chance of decision. Yeah. And he's like, no, I don't feel any differently. I still want to pursue you. So I'm like, okay. But in my head, I'm like, he need a day or so to put the soak in. Like, he probably in shock, whatever. And
he
so
need a day or so.
He needed a day or so. He needed like 1 to 2 business days. It's got to really settle in and let him, know. Because I mean, not only that, the money to freeze eggs and do IVF, you're talking about $100,000 to $130,000. Like the money. So I'm like, does he really understand that how compounded it is, or is it just right now? It's just in the moment. So he, like a week later, he was like, oh, I just want to tell you, like, I've been thinking about what we talked about the other week, and I still feel the same, and I just want to reassure you. So I'm like, okay, that's cute. That's sweet. All right. So then it comes time, and I have a doctor's appointment, and I'm going to go to this fertility specialist I've been putting off. My friend was like, I think you need to go, and you need to get real answers. She was like, because I don't think the way the doctor handled you the last time was even the right way to handle it. He called you over the phone and told you. She was like, first of all, I have a problem with that. So she was like, so I'm like, okay. So I'm like, hey, I made an appointment. I just kind of like throw it out there one day, in the middle of the conversation. I'm like, so I have made an appointment today. He's asking me how my day was. And I'm like, I'm going to go and I'm just going to see how it is and see what this doctor says. Like, get another opinion, see what this doctor says. And so he was like, okay, would you like me to go with you? And I was like, oh no, that's fine. It's fine. It's cool. And I think that's something that I'm in this season really working on is we pray for things and we believe for things. We ask God for things. But I think we have to really pray like, hey, God, prep me that when you give me what I'm asking for, that I can really receive it. Yeah. And so my initial reaction was, oh, no, that's fine. It's fine. Rewind a year ago, my whole thing was, God, I'm doing this all alone. Like here I am, I'm doing this all by myself. And so I was like quiet. Then I was quiet for a while and he was like doing something. So he was like, I said, I wouldn't let you go with me. I don't have a problem with you being there. But I was like, I just don't know if when I get in there, I might start crying or something. I was like, they asked me to give the whole story. And I was like, sometimes I get emotional still. And he was like, okay. And so I was like, well, yeah, I just might be awkward. And he was like, why do you feel like you always have to be business all the time? He's like, I don't want you to feel like you always got to be running and that you can't. He said, I don't want you to feel like you always got to be running or like you always have to be 10 steps ahead. Mm-hmm. And he was like, so if you get in there and you cry, then you just cry and you have your moment and you go on. And I was like, whoa. But it made me realize, like, one, growing up, my dad was always like, I was the first child. So my dad was like very on it, very old school, for a long time. I was like, okay, Joe Jackson, like, but very to the T, like you either going to be the best or you're not going to do it at all. So you decide what you're going to do. Yeah. But I think that really carried over into my adulthood is like, okay, I do something. And instead of being like, okay, we can celebrate a little bit. I'm like, oh, so how could you have done better?
Oh, you
There's never a chance to be like, but if it's somebody else, I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, and so when he was like, I don't want you to feel like you always gotta be 5 steps ahead. And I was like, okay, that's me. Like he coming from my life. Like that is me. So I was like, all right. So I said, well, and I got ready to say, if you want to come, you can come. And then I stopped myself and I said, well, I would like for you to come if you're free. So I don't want to, and that's why I think people got to really say what they mean, right? Because what I was going to say was, oh, if you want to come, you can come. Instead of saying, you know what, I really would like you to be there and be wrong. And I don't know why. And I don't know why I couldn't figure out how to say that. I think because you just feel like Black women rarely get to be like, hey, can you, like, I want you to show up. Can I be vulnerable enough to tell you I want to show up? And so
when you do it, then if somebody lets you down, then you really be like, nah.
That. And so that's where I was. And so I was like, no. So when I was like, okay, well, and so I was like, well, if you want to, and I was like, no, I actually would really like if you come.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, okay. So even then, in the back of my mind, I'm still like, you know, just in case he, you know, something happened, or if work don't allow him to come, like, it's cool. Like, if he gets held up at work. So the day of my appointment, I don't go to work. I'm like, I'm gonna work from home. And so he was like, okay, I'm gonna be there. And so, you know, I already got a list, because one, I'm so nervous just in general from like being in doctor's offices and different things. So I'm like, oh, if I get there and I have to wait on him, like, I'm gonna be so annoyed because I don't want to wait on it. You know, I got the elevator, he was already there. Like, all the things that I was trying to be like, if I have to do this, I'm gonna be frustrated. And if I have to do this, and so, like, I think that is what I think I really learned. It's like, okay, it's one thing to be like, hey, I really want this, or I want to work to this, but really doing the work to be like, am I ready to receive it? So I'm like, hey, you know, I've been saying like, oh, I want these things. And so my friend was like, well, what do you want him to do exactly? Like, when he's there? And I was like, I don't know. Like, that's a good question. Like, I don't know what the support looks like. Like, I don't know how I don't know how I want it or how I need it. I was like, one thing I don't want him to do is be too, if I get upset, like, I don't want him to like rush in, like, just let me have a moment a little bit. And so, I mean, everything I could have wanted him to do, he did it. Like, without me saying, without me having a coach or be like, hey, can you do this? Like, he did all the things. And I was just like, okay, God, like, let me really work on myself. You know, it's like, it's a forever thing. Working on yourself is a forever thing. Like, what's a struggle today won't be a struggle. Like, it's a forever thing. And so I really had to be like, okay, God, like, I see. Yeah, but it's one thing to hypothetically be like, oh yeah, when it comes, I'm gonna be ready. And then it's another thing when you in that thing.
Yeah.
And emotionally, you like, oh, it's time to be vulnerable. Like, ooh, like, and it's all. But he was like, not even doing the talking. He was showing up. You know, like, I'm telling you I'm about it, or I told you I would come and be about it, and I'm gonna show you how much I'm gonna be about it. And I just was like, okay. Like, he said, I just feel like, you know, do you have everything you need? And I was like, oh yeah, I know. He's like, okay. He's like, because sometimes I just feel like you're just waiting on the other shoe to drop. And I was like,
ooh.
Oh.
That's a blessing that he's honest.
Yeah, he was. He was like, I just feel like, you know, like, you seem like you're having fun. He's like, and I just want to make sure you're having fun. He was like, but is there something else I could do? He's like, because I just get the feeling that like you're fun, but it's like this hesitation, like you just waiting for the other shoe. And like, I was, but I don't think I really realized how much, you know, that he was even noticed. And I was like, you're right. Like,
wow.
That I'm like, you're right. But then I had to be like, okay, God, like, you showing me. Like,
get it together, girl. He read you.
Right. Like, hey, I went, and then it was like the timing of like, okay, well, you know, the last couple of years he was doing this and he was in law school, and then he was like, oh, then I came here and I graduated, I did whatever, and then I came to law school. And then I was like the timing of where I was like, you know, when I was like, oh God, I'm doing this by myself. I couldn't have done it with him because he wasn't even in the air, you know, like when it all worked out that I was like, okay, I did it by myself. It taught me some things, but now I no longer have to do it by myself.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, but no, there's a time for everything, right? And there was a time to do it by myself and learn that lesson. And now it's the time for me to be like, hey, I don't have to carry all the stress by myself. Because, you know, like a lot of times when I would read about women who were going through fertility issues, whatever, it was always you know, we're trying to decide. We think this, or we want to do that, or we got to whatever. And I was like, you know, at nighttime when I come in home, I was like, it's nobody for me to pillow talk with. Like, it's me trying to decide for two people. And my friend was like, what do you mean? I was like, because I'm not married. So whatever decision I make now is going to affect somebody if I get married then. So I'm like, I'm trying to make all the decisions for somebody I don't even know yet. You know, like I was like, it's just hard, and I'm trying to make the right decision. I don't want to make an emotional decision. I want to make a decision now that I feel good about 10 years from now. And I went to this fertility doctor, really nice. And he's telling me he wouldn't even, when he said, you know, Ashley, when I look at these images, he was like, I see the damage that was done, and I can see all this. And he was like, I really am not convinced that your one fallopian tube is really not working. He was like, I think that the fibroid is blocking, and that's why it couldn't fill when we put the dye in. So I'm like, oh, okay. And he was like, a hysterectomy is, I don't even, he literally wrote it down to put an X through it. He was like, one, I don't want you to even think that. He was like, so I'm sorry somebody told you that. So I'm like, okay. Wow. And he was like, I'm not even going to put that you have infertility issues. So he was like, so I'm marking through that on my chart. He was like, because I don't even, not even going to call you infertile. And I was like, okay, listen. And he was like, so this is what I think our approach was. And he gave me a new approach. You know, he was like, and this is how I think we'll proceed. And he was like, and then we'll go from there. And he was like, because I'm just not convinced that that's the case. He was like, so I want you to relax. And I just was like, okay, God, now I have a better vantage point. And so I think sometimes it's like a hurricane. When you're in the eye of the storm, all you can see is the storm. Yeah. I can't really see what's happening else out there. And so I was just like, okay, God, like, you know, I went through those things. I learned those lessons. Now somebody's telling me, hey, you might not have any troubles. You have this next surgery. I got some surgeons. And now I got somebody who's totally supportive to be like, hey, you know, like, if you need something, literally just came in here. I was like, oh, hey, what are you doing? Oh, listen, when I tell you, but I say that to say God is real, because before I was like, okay, I'm just preparing myself to be single. Mm-hmm. You know, like, and I think that was also a defense mechanism, that I was kind of like, you know, hey, I'm just preparing myself that I've been single and I know I can do it. And if I live alone, like, I just live alone. And wasn't because I didn't want to, but that's, you know, like I said, I just said it to say, like, when it's your time, it's your time, right? Like, because when I met, I was like, okay, met, okay, cool. All the odds be against that we met, and then here's somebody who's doing all the things that not somebody in particular, but a dusty son was like, oh, that's too much. You know, you too much. And so I think that's why I think when I say people got to find their people who are respectful and reciprocate, because you're only going to be too much for people who you're not on the same level as. Absolutely. That don't mean that you're above them or they below you. It just means y'all not on the same page. You're not on the same level. Yeah. And so when people be like, oh, you do too much and you to this and you to that, I'm like, okay, well, and you know, it doesn't hurt to say like, hey, let me self-assess. Do I think these things are true? And then be like, hey, you know what? I don't think, or this is who I am, and go on, you know? And so I'm like, literally all the things, you know, I was with somebody's dusty son who wouldn't do. God was like, got you. I'm manufacturing him right now. Just wait a minute. Just wait on it. Gotta package him up. For real. Gotta get him ready. And so that's why I think, you know, I feel like, I used to tell my friend, I was like, I just feel like when God moves, he moves. He don't need no get ready. Yeah. He don't need no get set. He don't need no nothing. Like when that's it. When it's time, it's time. And so, you know, I knew that, but I think this is just reiterated, like, okay, you know, just to encourage people, like, sometimes it does feel like, you know, like, I remember I told my friend, I was like, you know, I was like, child, I've been blowing the main line up, but the line must be busy because God, you know, the Lord, I think he got me on hold. Like, he's not answering my call right now. Call her. And yeah, he was like, it's her again. She got to pray the same prayer. Like, I done heard her, like, okay. But really just to encourage people that, like, he does hear you. Mm-hmm. Now, that don't mean you're going to get everything you ask for, and I don't ever want to portray that, because that's not that. And that's one thing I think also, and even this, when I was so happy that day when I left the fertility doctor, and he was like, oh, I'm so happy for you. And I was like, thanks. Like, I'm just grateful you came and all these things. But I was just like, even if it don't work out the way I want it to, you know, because in the beginning, I always wanted children. But when they talked about, you know, I was like, oh, I've always also been open to adopting. But then when they talked about taking away the option to have my own biological children, it really, I was like, oh, that's a blow. You know, like, I already wanted to adopt anyway, but I wanted to adopt as an option, not as my only option, as I want to. Yes, as I want to. Okay, Lord, I this is, you know, like, are you going to take this from me? And really having to reconcile with, like, okay, if I want a child, I want a child. You know, like, I came here. When I moved here, I started volunteering at this homeless shelter. Mm-hmm. And I met this little boy. Shouldn't have really met him because he was not in the age, he wasn't really old enough to be in the little class I volunteered with. Mm-hmm. And they brought him in at 2 years old. And they're like, we think he's kind of advanced and he's probably getting bored with the other 2-year-olds. We want to bring him in here. And I was like, why God? 3-year-olds to 8-year-olds, which first of all I didn't agree with, because these are kids in the quote unquote inner city. So the stuff that my 8-year-old kids are saying is the same stuff that grown people are saying.
Yeah.
So I already don't think they should even be with 5-year-old kids. And then you're gonna bring a 2-year-old in here who's really impressionable. And I was like, are you not sure this is really the way?
Yeah.
And they were like, oh yeah, we're gonna bring him in here. And I mean, the day he came in, I remember he came in with somebody, he was crying. And it was a lady, she was like, oh yeah, I get him all the time. And I just was like, I don't know. He made eye contact and I was like, okay. And I walked over and I put my hand out and he just reached for me.
Yeah.
And, after that we saw each other. Then they closed down the shelter, ran the families out. And I knew that when they announced that they were going to close it down, I was like, well, dang, if I'm in this organization volunteering, technically I'm not allowed to see him outside of the group. But I was like, if this shuts down, maybe I just won't volunteer at the group, because I felt such a, for the last 2 years. Yeah, I'm like, it's been 2 years. Like, I feel such a connection. So I'm like, but how do I ask the mom without sounding like a creep?
Yeah.
I can get your kid.
I understand.
When I tell you, it took me about 3 months. Every week I would see her, and every week I would be like, I can't do it. And so I was like, I don't know when I'm going to work up the courage. And just so happened, the Lord, they came in and she was coming to pick him up. And somebody said out loud as I was walking out, and somebody said, oh, are y'all still looking for a place? And she was like, oh, this is our last week here. Oh. And I was like, oh, this is it.
Yep.
So I was like, dang, I got to. It's now or never. And so I asked. They ended up getting extended another couple weeks. But in that moment, that let me know that's why I know it was God. Because I was like, okay. So I was like, hey, I know he comes here. I was like, he will run to me every time. We run down the hall with his arms up. And so I was like, I just would like to get him, maybe take him to the zoo still, or do things with them. Mm-hmm. I was trying to really choose my words carefully, because I was like, I don't want to say, and then especially when you got a group of people who aren't used to people even considering them. Because I remember one time they were like, oh, you get paid to be here? And I was like, no, I paid to be here. Like, and they were like, oh, so you do this with your job? And I was like, no. And so to me, it was confusing to me, because I was just like, nah. Mm-hmm. And they were like, really? So you come down here just to come down here, it was like they couldn't even. And then I really had to think of like how it looks, like, because sometimes I'd be like, oh, sometimes they weren't that friendly to me. And I'm like, but then I realized how they thought I would just come there to fulfill, I do my little weekly due, because some of the people were like that, and that's their thing. But they just thought like, oh, she just down here because she thinks she gotta do her little thing. And then it was like, once they were kind of like, oh, so you just be coming down here just to come down here.
Because I love it. Right.
Then it was like, oh, okay. So, so I was like, I just want to try to do something, but only if you're comfortable. And she was like, yeah, that's fine. Mm-hmm. And I mean, now he's 6 years old, and, now I'm officially his godmom. We had a whole parade for his birthday, it was a celebration, but just, it made it, when I thought about it, and I was like, for years I've been with this kid, and I was like, and if something happened tomorrow and somebody was like, hey, can you take this kid? I was like, I wouldn't think twice about it. And I'd be like, it's my kid. Yep. And so I was like, so what, so I was just like, okay, God, what I've been saying is I want a kid. I was like, but now I'm just going to say, you know what? If you say I get a kid and it's not biological, then I'm willing to make peace with it.
Yeah.
I still would like to have my own biological kid. I would like to see myself or see my partner in my child. But if I don't, I can make peace with it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like once I got to the point where I was like, okay, God, your will, and I'm going to try to make peace with it. It's going to take me a second, peace. Then I feel like things started to kind of like fall into place.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I got to that place of like, okay.
Surrender.
That place of surrender, that humble place of like, you know what? Mm-hmm. If what I'm asking for is a child, and I want this, and here's this kid who gives me all this love, who I didn't even have been around with him since he was a newborn. At 2, that's it. At 2,
they choose you.
And so so I mean, and then after that, like I said, we had the parade this year when I had the birthday parade, and that's when his mom was like, I've been thinking about it. It's been on my mind. I've just been praying on it. Like, would you be his godmom?
That's
and
awesome.
So like then that was after, like I said, after. Meanwhile, she has no clue that I've been going through all these things, so she doesn't even know. So I was kind of like, okay, God, I see you, right? Like, got it. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think when people be like, oh, on Instagram, I didn't even know you was going through all this. Like, oh, your Instagram, I never tell. And like, oh, you should tell people. And I was like, I said, oh, I'm going to tell people. I was like, but in that moment, it wasn't the time.
Mm-mm.
Just because I didn't have the words to give myself, how I'm going to turn around and be telling y'all about it. Like, I was just trying to get through. And I was like, and now I can talk about it and be like, okay, now I can write up something about it. But I think, people are like, oh, you just got such faith. And I'm like, oh, no. You on the end. You on the end.
That part.
And I'm like, I won't even let you even think to be like, oh yeah, you crazy faith. No, you on the end. Cause I had many a day where I was so like really almost like, oh God, you betrayed me. Like, like how, I mean, the audacity, right? But
yeah,
really, but still felt like, oh
you
God,
felt
like,
it.
Playing. And and not only that, cause I went to this group one time at church and they had like an infertility ministry. And so I went to this little thing that they were having, and my friend was like, maybe you go, maybe you'll find like support of other women going through. So I'm like, okay, I'll try it. So first I felt a little out of place because most of the women in there were married. And so to me, that is very much so still a struggle, but that's not my struggle because you still get to go home and at least sometimes you might argue because y'all might be on having both emotional days, but you got somebody to bounce something off of. And I'm like, and that's what I'm struggling. I don't have that. Like, I don't have it. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna go. So I went and I listened to the ladies and they were talking, about their different struggles. And I was kind of like, okay, Lord, but I just feel a little out of place. But again, like I said, I say all that to just say, like, I still had those moments. I was like, okay. And even when I would go to the, go places and see babies, or like I had a friend, she was like going through a similar, had a fibroid, had the surgery and they messed up. And I remember she said, oh, my friend is pregnant and she asked me to help plan a baby shower. She's like, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
And she was like, do you struggle like that? And I was like, oh, I don't struggle in that way. I was like, but I do struggle. And she was like, I said, I struggle because every time I see on the news that somebody drowned a baby, they killed a baby, they left their baby, I said, then I get frustrated at God because I'd be like, so you will let them have like comparison is a thief of joy, but that's why I was like, that's where I'll be, because I'll be like, so you let them have a kid, and this how they do the kid, they they do this, and then so I was like, but seeing people have babies, that don't bother me because I feel like what's for you is for you, and what's for me is for me. I was like, but when I see people who have children treat them and wrong and abuse them, then I'd be like, God, you let them have a baby for that, like.
Yeah.
Because people would say, oh, well, you can adopt. And I'm like, but single parent adoption, do you know how hard it is to adopt a baby as a single parent?
They're going to say, they're going to take you through the ringer.
Yes. And so that's why, and that's again, back to my point of knowing the facts to be the facts and knowing when to say what to say and just to be like, okay, I'm going to stay in my lane. But those people say, oh, well, you can always adopt. And I was like, but I'm not even married. How hard am I going to be adopt? And where am I going to get the money? Because I'm still paying money on bills. Yeah. And I still got to have surgery. And so I'm like, so where do you think, and I knew people meant well, but I think sometimes you just really got to say, okay, sometimes you don't have to say anything. Hey, I'm thinking about you. Hey, I'm thinking about you. I don't know what you're going through, but I feel for, like something, you don't have to, everything is not a preachy moment. And I think that's what other believers, that's what people are like, oh, I got to preach. You ain't got to preach to me every time.
Yeah.
Just to, hey, I'm really sorry. I remember one of my friends one time, he was talking to me and he was like, how's everything? I know things are going on. And I was telling him, he was like, I'm really sorry. He's like, I don't know what to say. And I said, you know what? That's the most peaceful thing I've heard in a long time. I said, because you didn't throw, oh, well, try this and do that and do. I said, you just said, I don't know what to say. And I said, to me makes me feel good because I was just vulnerable with you to tell you what's going on with me. And you were vulnerable to tell me
the truth.
I don't yeah, that's all I needed. That you were vulnerable enough to say, I don't even have the words to give you.
Wow.
So I just think the people, you got to share your story. You going through something is bigger than you. So whatever I got going on is really bigger than me. I don't think you got to rush and tell it. Social media be like, oh, everything is instant. When you're ready, then do it. Not a moment before, but when you're ready and you can help somebody else because it really is bigger than you. If I go through all this and I don't do nothing but get better and keep it to myself, like what good is that? It would really be in vain. All the things I went through, all the struggles, all the effort, it really would be wouldn't do it any justice for me to just get better and then be like, okay, I'm good. I made it through and go on.
Real talk.
Yeah.